My name's Nolan Grady. I'm 38 years old, own a half-functioning auto shop on the outskirts of Cedar Falls, Michigan, and according to my family, I'm the guy who peaked in high school and forgot to send a postcard. That's how every family dinner felt, like a roast, except I was the only one on the spit. My younger sister Becca, golden child, Ivy League law degree, power suits, a house that looks like a Pottery Barn showroom. She once joked that my business was just adult daycare for broken cars. Ha, hilarious. Me? I ran Grady's Auto, a tin-roofed shack of a garage behind my trailer home. It rattled in the wind and leaked like a gossip. I lived on instant noodles, gas station coffee, and stubborn pride. At 38, I'd long given up trying to impress anyone. Still, some days hit harder than others, especially the ones that started with frost creeping across my ceiling. That morning, I rolled out of bed to the groan of my heater. The thing screamed like it was haunted and burned my hand on the metal vent. Michigan winters don't play. Breakfast was a black coffee and a stale protein bar I found under my truck seat. Gourmet stuff. I trudged out to the garage, still rubbing sleep from my eyes. The neon sign above the door flickered like it was deciding whether life was worth it. Grady's Auto, it read, when the G wasn't glitching. Across the yard, old man Terry was already on his porch in his robe, sipping from a thermos that definitely wasn't just coffee. "Still living the dream, huh, Grady?" he called, grinning. "Yeah, the dream where the heat's broken, the truck leaks oil, and nobody pays their invoice," I muttered back. Terry just chuckled and waved his cup. Saw Becca on TV. Some panel about tax litigation. Fancy stuff. I smiled through clenched teeth and went inside. The morning was slow. I replaced brake pads on a '98 Civic for a guy who paid in quarters and expired coupons. Business as usual. Around lunch, I was elbow deep in an oil change when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it go. Spam calls were my most reliable fan base, but something made me answer. "Hello?" A familiar, gravelly voice came through. "That you, Nolan?" "Yeah. Who's this?" "It's Gus. Gus Marin. You used to haul hay for me back in the day." I blinked. "Gus? From the farm out near Denton Hollow?" "That's the one. Listen, I got a pile of junk out in the barn. Thought you might want it before I send it off to the scrap guys." I furrowed my brow. What kind of junk? Best way to explain it is to just see it. Normally, I'd pass. But Gus had that tone, the kind people use when they're offering something with a story behind it. And I was tired of the same old grind. The drive out was as I remembered, long, quiet, and lined with leafless trees and frostbitten fields. Gus's place looked like time had parked and never restarted. The barn leaned like it had secrets. Paint peeled off in ribbons. I swear one of the cows gave me a look like, "You sure about this?" Gus was waiting by the doors, chewing on a toothpick and wearing the same overalls I remembered from 15 years ago. "In here," he said, pulling the rusted doors open with a groan. The smell hit me first, motor oil, old wood, and something distinctly rodent-flavored. Sunlight poured through cracked slats, cutting across dust clouds and the forgotten ghosts of 100 farm tools. And then I saw it. Covered in grime, buried behind broken chairs and an ancient plow, sat a car. A muscle car. Long nose, fastback design. My heart skipped. I pushed past the junk and wiped the dust off the hood with my sleeve. Blue paint peeked through, a Shelby. A real one. 67 GT500, I whispered, more to myself than Gus. "Bingo," he said, toothpick bobbing. I crouched, found the VIN plate, and pulled out my phone. A quick search confirmed it. Real, not a replica. "You selling it?" I asked, trying to hide my excitement. Scrap guy offered $200 for the metal. "You can have it for the same." I almost dropped my phone. $200? Either you take it or it goes next week? I didn't even hesitate. Handed over the crumpled bills I had on me and promised the rest tomorrow. We dragged it out into the light, the tires hissing like they hadn't seen daylight in decades. The body was rough, rust on the roof, dents in the fenders, interior destroyed, but it was all there. The engine, the soul of the beast, was intact. Driving it back on a trailer felt like hauling a crown jewel. No one else recognized. Until I got home. I had just unhooked the straps when I heard it. Laughter. Gary, my other neighbor and full-time menace, stood by his truck, holding a beer at noon like he was retired from life. "What the hell is that?" he cackled. "Looks like a raccoon lived in it and left cause it was too gross." I ignored him, tried to focus on the way the light hit the car just right, how I could already see what it could become. But Gary wasn't the only audience. Within minutes, more neighbors wandered over, curious, amused. One kid even asked if I was building a parade float. I wanted to scream. Instead, I wiped my hands and kept working. Then, my phone buzzed. Of course, Becca. "Hey," I said flatly. "I heard you bought a car," she said. "Dad says it's some rust bucket?" I closed my eyes. "It's a '67 Shelby GT500. It's a classic. It's a money pit," she replied. "Nolan, you need to be realistic. You're nearly 40. I wanted to hang up. Instead, I just said, "Thanks for the pep talk," and clicked off. Standing there, surrounded by judgmental eyes and the smell of mouse droppings, I had a choice: sell it for a quick flip or fight like hell to bring it back. I chose the fight. Restoring a Shelby GT500 from the bones up, that wasn't a project, it was a war. And I had just enlisted with a half-empty wallet and a garage held together with hope and duct tape. The first week, I didn't even know where to begin. Every inch of the car whispered a new problem. Rust chewed through the roof like termites at a buffet. The seats had stuffing leaking out like someone had used them as a dog bed. And the wiring? I've seen more organized spaghetti, but I couldn't look away. I saw it, what it could be. What I could be if I pulled this off. So I set a routine. Every day after the shop closed, I came home, changed into my greasiest coveralls, nuked a sad excuse for dinner, and got to work. By midnight, I was usually covered in dust, metal shavings, and enough curse words to offend a sailor. Gary, of course, made sure to give running commentary. "You replacing the rust with more rust?" he asked one night, arms crossed, beer in hand. I didn't respond. I had stopped explaining myself a long time ago. The real problem started when I tried sourcing parts. Classic Mustangs aren't exactly lining store shelves. And the ones that were available, let's just say there were sellers who thought vintage was code for add an extra zero, $12,000. That's what I had in my account, just enough to stay afloat, eat like a college kid, and maybe buy one good part every other week. But the Shelby didn't care about my budget. She demanded everything. I spent hours digging through online forums, message boards, junkyard listings, even joined a Facebook group where some guy offered to trade an original fuel cap for a signed John Cena photo. Tempting, but I needed more than nostalgia. One night, I found an ad for a set of original tail lights. Called the guy up. He said I had to pick them up in person, 3 hours away. I left at 5 a.m., drove through 2 counties, and found myself in front of a barn held together with bungee cords and stubborn optimism. The guy handed me the lights, wrapped in newspaper, dated 1998. On the drive back, tail lights riding shotgun, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Momentum. But then came the mice. I was under the car inspecting the transmission when I noticed shredded insulation. Closer look revealed tiny droppings. Then I saw the nest, tucked neatly near the firewall, like they'd signed a lease and everything. One popped its head out. I swear it looked smug. I ended up pulling out the entire dash, vacuuming a lifetime of mouse real estate, and scrubbing until my knuckles bled. I tossed out what felt like half the car. Still, I kept going. Then came the paint job. I'd watched hours of YouTube tutorials. Just follow the steps, they said. It's easy, they said. Lies. The first coat looked like it had been applied during a dust storm. The finish was uneven, patchy, and somehow managed to highlight every dent I hadn't even noticed before. I stood there, paint gun in hand, looking at my masterpiece of failure, and laughed. The kind of laugh that teeters on the edge of a breakdown. Sand it down. Start again. Repeat. My hands were blistered. My bank account was coughing up its last cents. My shoulders ached from nights hunched over the engine. But I didn't stop. Not when Becca called again to remind me that a 401k was a smarter investment. Not when my landlord threatened to raise the rent because of noise complaints. And not even when the radiator gave out mid-test and sprayed me with boiling coolant like a geyser from hell. I was in deep. And if I stopped now, I'd lose more than a project. I'd lose the last shred of belief I had in myself. So I did something reckless. I walked into a bank, sat across from a guy in a tie that probably cost more than my truck, and asked for a loan. 50 grand, secured by my garage and trailer. The guy raised an eyebrow. "What's the collateral?" he asked. I pulled out a photo of the Shelby, mid-restoration. He chuckled. "This is a hobby, not a business." "No," I said, meeting his eyes. "It's a future. Somehow, some way." He approved it. The second I signed, the weight hit me. There was no backup plan. If this failed, I'd lose everything. My home, my shop, maybe even myself. But I was tired of playing it safe. Back in the garage, I worked harder. Stripped the engine, rebuilt the carburetor, replaced every wire. I poured every dollar, every ounce of energy, every sleepless night into that car. And then came Claire. She showed up on a Wednesday. I was outside, scraping dried paint from my forearm, when I heard a voice behind me. "That A67 Shelby GT500? I turned around, startled. She had a camera around her neck, a beat-up notebook tucked under one arm, and a smile that said she was used to being right. "Yeah," I said cautiously. "What gave it away? The stance, the hood, and the fact that it looks like it's been through a war and still wants to race." I laughed. For the first time in a while, it wasn't forced. She introduced herself, Claire Romano, freelance photojournalist. She'd been driving through town, saw the Shelby from the road, and had to stop. "Mind if I shoot a few pics?" she asked. "Sure, just don't zoom in on my bank account," I joked. She laughed, snapped a few shots, and then said something I didn't expect. "You know, this could be a story. The guy rebuilding a classic. Grit, rust, and all. People love that stuff." I shrugged. "It's just a passion project, maybe. But passion's rare these days. Let me write something about it. Who knows? Maybe it helps." I didn't expect much, but I figured why not? A few days later, Claire came back, this time with a real setup. Tripod, lights, interview questions. She asked about everything. The car, the why, the struggle. I talked more than I planned to. About the failures, the debt, the way my family treated me like a cautionary tale. She just listened, really listened. The blog post went live a week later, titled, "The Man in the Garage, One Rust Bucket, One Big Dream." I thought I'd get a few clicks, maybe a share or two from car geeks. It went viral, 500,000 views in 3 days. Comments flooded in, mechanics, dreamers, old-timers who once owned a Shelby and swore they still missed it. People sent links, advice, offers for parts, even money. I refreshed the page every hour, stunned, and then the calls started. Not strangers, my family, mom first. "Sweetheart, we saw the article. Isn't that amazing?" I stared at the phone. "Funny how they never called when my power got shut off last winter." Then Becca, "So you're, like, internet famous now?" I hung up before I said something I'd regret. That night, I stood in the garage looking at the car. Paint was half done, interior still gutted. But for the first time since I started, I didn't feel alone. I felt seen. And that changed everything. The week after Claire's blog exploded, everything around me changed. Not the garage, not the car, those still looked like chaos in steel form. But people? People started acting different. Suddenly, I wasn't just Nolan, the guy who worked on clunkers and owed everyone a favor. I was the guy restoring a Shelby. Even Gary, Mr. Mock Everything I Do, toned down the jokes. Not entirely. The man had sarcasm baked into his DNA. But I caught him one evening standing a little too long at the edge of my driveway, watching as I welded the passenger door frame. Didn't say a word, just nodded. Honestly, that meant more than it should have. The blog views kept climbing. Claire's inbox was a war zone. Parts offers, interviews. Someone from a podcast called Legends Under the Hood even wanted me to talk about automotive heritage. I didn't know what the hell that meant, but I said yes. And then came the sponsorship emails. Some local tool company offered to send me a new lift jack set if I just wore their hat in a video. I didn't even own a ring light, but Claire made it happen. She brought over a mic, set up her camera, and recorded me talking about the build, nerves, doubts, and all. We posted it. 30,000 views in 24 hours. At night, Claire stuck around. Sometimes she helped clean parts. Other times, she just sat on a stool, sipping tea, jotting things in her notebook while I worked under the hood. She had this way of asking questions that didn't feel like interviews. "Why this car?" she asked one night, her voice low over the sound of the ratchet. I didn't answer right away, just kept tightening the bolts. Then I said, "Because no one believed I could." And she nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. But while the world outside seemed to be catching on, the people who should have been proud, they doubled down. It started with a phone call from my dad. "Your mother wants me to talk to you," he said, skipping hello entirely. "She's worried you're getting carried away." I leaned against the garage door, wiping grease off my hands. Carried away with what? Working? Building something for once? He sighed. "This whole internet thing, your sister thinks it's going to your head." There it was. The usual playbook. Downplay, deflect, doubt. I kept my voice calm. "I'm not asking for anyone's blessing, just doing my thing." "That's what worries us," he said before hanging up. "No good luck. No, we're proud." Just another reminder I was the family embarrassment with a wrench. So I stopped answering their calls. I focused on the build. Replaced the suspension. Rebuilt the carburetor. Installed a new exhaust kit with tips that looked like they could eat small animals. Progress wasn't linear. One step forward, two steps face first into failure. Like the night the garage caught fire. Okay, not fire, but sparks, flames, enough to panic. I had been rewiring the ignition, spliced something wrong, and poof, a small explosion from under the dash. I jumped back, tripped over a toolbox, and landed hard on the concrete. It took me 3 minutes to realize the fire extinguisher was still under the kitchen sink. Once the smoke cleared, I sat on the floor, coughing, staring at the mess I'd just made. Claire showed up 20 minutes later with burgers. She walked in, stopped dead, sniffed the air, and raised an eyebrow. "You making barbecue under the dash now?" I cracked a smile, even though my pride was bruised and my knuckles were bleeding. We ate in silence, sitting on the garage floor, headlights casting shadows on the wall. "You ever think about giving up?" I asked. "Sure," she said, without hesitation. "But then I think about who I'd be if I did." That one stuck with me. The next day I fixed the wiring, replaced the melted insulation, retested everything 3 times before turning the key again. When the engine finally roared to life, clean, smooth, like it wanted to breathe, I yelled loud enough to startle the birds out of the trees. The Shelby was alive. After that, things moved faster. I installed the seats, rebuilt the dash, got a proper steering wheel instead of the cracked one that had seen better decades. Claire found a guy in Arizona selling authentic rear panels. Overnight shipped. He didn't even charge us. Every piece made it feel more real, less like a dream, more like destiny on 4 wheels. That's when Kyle showed up. Yeah, that Kyle. I was elbow deep in the engine bay when I heard a car roll up. A soft purr, all electric. I didn't even need to look. Tesla. I turned, wiped my hands on a towel, and watched my little brother step out in a suit that cost more than my rent. "Nolan," he said like he'd practiced the greeting in the mirror. "Nice setup." I just stared. "What do you want?" He looked around the garage like he was slumming it. "Heard about the build. Thought I'd stop by. Check on you." Check on me? The guy hadn't visited since our mom's birthday 3 years ago, and that was only because the catering was fancy. "You didn't come here to check on me," I said. He gave that tight-lipped smile I always hated. "Okay, fine. I wanted to talk business." Here it was, the real reason. "See, you've got eyeballs now, and buzz. That's valuable." I crossed my arms. So, I've got some investors interested in funding a classic car startup. Restoration meets online content. You bring the skills, I bring the structure. We could turn this thing into something real. I almost laughed. "You think this isn't real?" I asked, gesturing to the car. No, he said, holding up his hands. "I just think you're sitting on something bigger than you realize. And you could use help." "Let me guess," I said. "And you'd own 60%? 50, he offered. Like that made it better. I walked over, grabbed a wrench, and tightened a bolt just to break the silence. Then I said, "I'd rather eat broken glass." He didn't get mad, just shook his head and said, "Suit yourself." As he got back in his car, I called out, "Hey, Kyle." He paused. "If your Tesla ever breaks down, don't call me." He smiled. "Wouldn't dream of it." After he drove off, I sat in the driver's seat of the Shelby and gripped the wheel. No suit, no investors, no shortcuts. This was mine. Every bolt, every hour, every failure, every win. That weekend, Claire and I entered the car into a local restoration meet. Nothing fancy. Just a parking lot behind a diner, where gearheads gathered with thermoses and folding chairs. But when I pulled in, all eyes turned. Kids pointed. Old men nodded. Some guy even yelled, "That a real GT500? I popped the hood. Let them see. The Shelby, once a rusted shell hidden in a forgotten barn, now gleamed under the late afternoon sun. Blue, polished, angry, beautiful. I didn't win any trophies. Didn't need to. Because I finally felt like I'd arrived. The Shelby wasn't just running now, she was alive. You could feel it when you turned the key. That low, hungry rumble like thunder rolling in from far off. The kind of sound that didn't ask for respect. It demanded it. And I'd built that. With burnt fingers, late nights, and more grit than anyone thought I had in me. People were starting to see it too. After the local meet, Claire's latest video of the car's first full startup hit nearly 1 million views. It wasn't just gearheads watching anymore. It was everyone. Mechanics, dreamers, even teenagers on TikTok arguing about whether classic or electric was king. Some guy in Italy commented, "You brought a ghost back to life." It was surreal. Every ping from my phone felt like a small explosion. Emails, interview requests, people offering cash just to come take a photo with the car. It was like the universe had finally decided I was worth noticing. But attention comes with strings. One night, after closing the garage, I came inside to find a voicemail blinking on my burner of a landline. It was Mom. "I know you're busy," her voice started, soft but pointed. "But your father and I think it's time we had a proper talk. You've got something big now, Nolan. You're finally doing something. Stable. Stable." That word always stung coming from her. Like she couldn't picture success without a desk, a tie, and some awful office coffee. The next day they showed up. Didn't call first. Just pulled into the driveway in Dad's beige sedan, like they were dropping in for a Sunday lunch. I was sanding the hood, final polish, when I heard the engine cut off. Mom stepped out first. Still dressed like a realtor, even in the middle of nowhere. Dad followed, arms crossed, face unreadable. "We thought we'd see it in person," she said. I nodded. Didn't say anything. Just wiped my hands and stood by the Shelby like it was armor. Dad circled the car, inspecting it like he was at a museum he didn't quite care about. "Not bad," he finally muttered. "Paint could use a little more depth." Claire, who'd been filming B-roll near the front bumper, stopped. Gave him a long look. Mom stepped closer to me. "Nolan, this thing, it's a real opportunity. You could flip it, make good money, maybe even do something smart with it." I clenched my jaw. Something smart. They didn't care about the story, the journey, or how this project had pulled me out of a pit I'd been living in for years. They just saw value, a dollar sign with tires. "Already made plans," I said. Dad frowned. "What kind of plans?" I looked over at Claire, then back at them. "Meacham auction, Chicago, 2 weeks." They both blinked. "That's a national auction," Mom said, like she couldn't believe I'd even think I belonged there. "Exactly." There was a pause. Then Dad said, "Well, if you need help managing the money after the sale, I cut in, I've got it handled." They didn't argue, just nodded, tried to play it off like this had been their idea all along. But I saw the tightness in their faces, the realization that they'd lost control of my narrative. They left shortly after, didn't say goodbye, and I didn't watch them go. 2 weeks later, we rolled into Chicago with the Shelby on a trailer and my stomach doing backflips. The Meacham auction was like a dream soaked in gasoline. Endless rows of pristine cars, Ferraris, vintage Corvettes, a couple of Jaguars that looked like they belonged in Bond movies. Every car had a story, every owner had money, a lot of it, and there I was. With a car I dug out of a forgotten barn and rebuilt one bolt at a time. Claire handled the registration, media packet, photos, everything. She was in her zone, bouncing between cameras and paperwork like she'd done it her whole life. I tried not to think about what would happen if it didn't sell, or worse, if no one even bid. We got our spot, right in the middle row between a 1969 Camaro and a custom-built Dodge Demon. They looked like showroom royalty. My Shelby still had a few scuffs around the rear bumper. I hadn't even had time to fully redo the leather seats, but she gleamed under those lights, proud, defiant. The bidding was scheduled for the final day. For 2 straight days, I walked the floor with Claire, handing out cards, answering questions, watching collectors do the math in their heads as they looked at the Shelby. Some nodded. Others gave polite smiles and moved on. The night before the sale, I barely slept. My head spun with numbers. What if she went for less than I owed? What if I had to go back home, broke, humiliated, and still paying off this dream for the next 10 years? What if it doesn't sell? I asked Claire at 2 a.m., sitting in a cheap hotel room with peeling wallpaper and vending machine snacks on the table. She looked at me, unblinking. Then you drive it home, keep building, sell the next one. I laughed bitterly. That easy, huh? No, she said, but it's real. That stuck with me. Auction day. Crowds gathered. I stood backstage, hands shaking, watching the numbers roll on other cars. $250 K, $410 K. Some European sports car hit $500,000, and people actually clapped. Then it was our turn. I walked alongside the Shelby as they rolled her out. My heart was pounding so hard I couldn't hear the announcer at first. Just the sound of my own breath and the squeak of the tires on the platform. The spotlight hit, and for a moment the crowd actually paused. Phones came up. Whispers. Original GT500, restored by hand. Internet story. Claire stood near the front row with her camera. Gave me a nod. The auctioneer started. Do I hear 200,000? The first bid came in faster than I expected. Then another. 250, 270, 320. My knees nearly buckled. Every number that flashed felt like a punch and a prayer rolled into one. I saw people whispering, calculating, bidding. Some tapped out. Others pushed harder. 380, 400. Then silence. You could feel the air thicken. 420, final bid. Going once, going twice. Sold. $420,000. I didn't hear the gavel. I barely heard the cheers. Just the ringing in my ears and the thump of my heart against my ribs. Claire found me backstage. I was sitting on a crate, staring at my hands like they didn't belong to me anymore. She handed me a drink. Not champagne. A soda, cold and cheap. Felt perfect. You did it, she said. No, I replied. We did. That night we didn't party. We just walked the Chicago River Walk, watching boats cut through the dark water and lights shimmer on the surface like stars had fallen and refused to sink. You ever think this would happen? I asked. Claire smiled. Honestly, I think you always knew it could. You just stopped letting yourself believe it. We sat in silence for a while, soaking in the stillness. Then I said, I think I'm ready for something bigger. She turned toward me. Like what? I looked at her. A real shop. Our own space. Cars, stories, the whole thing. Her eyes lit up. You serious? As a heart attack. She grabbed my hand, squeezed it. Then let's build it. We didn't waste time. 2 weeks after the auction, Claire and I were standing in front of a massive, steel-framed garage just outside Cedar Falls. It had 3 bays, 2 lifts, and a gravel lot big enough to host a small car show. The walls needed paint. The roof had a leak near the back corner. But to me, it looked like freedom. We signed the lease that same day, put down a deposit that would have made old me cry. We called it Grady and Romano Customs. She wanted it simple. I wanted it personal. And let's be honest, nothing said serious business like a last name on the wall. The next month was a whirlwind. Between hiring 2 part-time mechanics, setting up a basic website, and painting over decades of grime, it felt like we were sprinting with no finish line in sight. Every morning started before sunrise. Every night ended with aching backs and hands too sore to hold a fork. But it was ours. The first car through the doors was a 1969 Dodge Charger, sat in a barn for 17 years. The owner, a quiet guy named Benny, said he'd give us full creative control. Just wanted her to feel like she used to. We took that job personally. Claire documented the whole thing, every weld, every part delivery, every cuss word when a bolt snapped in half. She edited it into a 5-minute time-lapse that somehow made the chaos look like magic. The video hit 2.3 million views in the first week. Orders followed, not just from Michigan, Chicago, Ohio. Even one guy from Texas, willing to ship his 71 Barracuda just so we could bring it back to life. And just like that, we were booked 6 months out. People started recognizing me at the gas station, calling the shop to talk resto strategy. I even got asked to sign a wrench. Claire teased me for a week. We were flying. But success, it paints a target on your back, especially when you come from a town where people don't clap until they see a check clear. One afternoon, I walked into the shop to find a letter taped to the door. Zoning violation, pending review. I blinked. Claire came out of the office, holding her own copy. You got one too? Apparently, someone had filed a complaint about non-conforming commercial use of the property. Too much traffic, too much noise. Something about the gravel lot not meeting code. We both knew what that meant. Someone wanted us gone. I asked around, quietly. A buddy from the city permit office told me the complaint came from a private citizen, anonymous. But the language? Legal, precise. My gut said Kyle. He'd gone quiet since the auction. No texts, no pop-ins, just silence, which from him was louder than any threat. I let it go, at least for the moment. We made a plan. Claire called a lawyer. I fixed the parking lot myself, laid down asphalt over 2 nights with a borrowed roller and a mountain of frustration. We added a sound barrier to the back lot, kept working. Nothing was stopping us. But the stress? It started wearing thin. We were running 2 full builds, handling 3 partial restorations, and still editing content every week. Claire was glued to her laptop. I was falling asleep under dashboards. We hadn't had a real meal together in over a month. One night, after a particularly brutal day, she walked into the garage, set down her camera bag, and just stared at me. You ever think maybe we're growing too fast? I stopped mid-sanding and looked up. You mean slow down? She nodded. Yeah, or at least breathe. I thought about it. She wasn't wrong. Things were moving faster than we planned. The dream was growing, but so were the cracks. I just don't want to lose this, I said. We finally have something real. I know, she replied softly. But I don't want to lose us trying to keep up with it. That hit me harder than I expected. We stood there in the half-lit garage, surrounded by tool carts and unfinished steel, and for a moment I remembered what started all of this. Not money, not views, connection. I crossed the floor and took her hand. Okay, I said, let's slow down, just enough to catch our breath. So we adjusted, said no to a few jobs, took weekends off, got coffee together in the mornings instead of inhaling gas station burritos in the dark. It helped. We laughed more, ate real food, even binge-watched a terrible reality show about boat flipping that Claire was oddly obsessed with. But the past doesn't always stay buried. One rainy Tuesday, Kyle walked through the front door, wearing his usual suit. No tie this time, casual by his standards. He looked around, nodding slowly like he was sizing up competition. This place is legit, he said. What do you want, Kyle? I asked. He walked over to the counter, set down a manila envelope and said, a conversation. I glanced at Claire, then back at him. She stayed silent, eyes locked on him like she was ready for whatever stunt came next. He opened the folder. Inside were plans. A new facility, twice the size, located in Detroit, funded by investors. My team's moving into classic restoration, he said. Full-service digital content, brand partnerships. And I figured, no, I cut in. He blinked. You haven't even heard the offer. I don't need to. I already said no once. Kyle tried to laugh it off. Look, you did great with the Shelby, but this? He gestured around. This is a hobby with overhead. What I'm offering is legacy. I stepped closer. You see a dollar sign. I see stories, families, people keeping memories alive. He raised an eyebrow. And how long do you think people will keep watching that? Until the next trend? Claire stepped forward, calm, but sharp. If your offer was so good, you wouldn't need to come here trying to poach what we built. Kyle's face hardened. Fine. Don't say I didn't try." He walked out without another word, and I knew it for sure then. He was behind the zoning complaint, the timing, the language. It all fit. But I didn't chase him down, I didn't yell. I just turned to Claire and said, "Let's build something he can't copy." We went harder than ever, doubled down on our style, rough hands, real talk, raw restoration. No frills, no scripts, just us and the machines. And the people loved it. Our YouTube hit 1 million subscribers that summer. Orders backed up 10 months. We hired 2 more mechanics and brought in an apprentice from the local trade school. His name was CJ19, scared of messing up, but eager. "Just don't touch the Shelby," I joked. "She bites." He laughed like he didn't quite believe me. That fall, we bought the shop outright, paid cash. No loans, no partners. Just elbow grease and loyalty. We hosted our first car meet that October. Bonfire in the back, food trucks, old rock music humming through portable speakers. Over 50 cars showed up. Dozens of people brought their kids, shared stories. One guy drove 4 hours just to see the Charger we'd rebuilt. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was community. That night, Claire and I sat on the hood of the Shelby, drinks in hand, stars scattered above us like sparks from a welder's torch. "This," I said, "this feels like home." She smiled. "Good," she said, resting her head on my shoulder. "Because it is." Winter came early that year. By the first week of November, frost clung to the shop windows like fingerprints on glass. The kind of cold that made wrenches feel like ice picks and had us swapping out gas heaters every other week. But even in the freeze, the shop stayed alive. Engines echoed off the steel beams. The smell of motor oil mixed with fresh coffee from Claire's thermos. CJ played old blues on a Bluetooth speaker that barely held a charge. Customers came bundled in coats, their voices full of stories, first cars, teenage joyrides, memories buried in metal. Grady and Romano Customs had grown into something bigger than we ever imagined. Not just a garage, not even just a business. It was a gathering place, a place where forgotten things were brought back to life. But deep down, I knew something was still unfinished. Not on the books, not with the builds. Inside me, it had been months since I last heard from my family. No texts, no calls. Not even Kyle, which was honestly a blessing. But the silence, it felt louder than the noise. One morning, I opened the mailbox and found a small envelope. No return address, just my name and familiar handwriting. It was from Dad. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, nothing fancy. No apology, no explanation, just 4 words. "Still proud of you." I read it twice, 3 times, let it sink in. Then I folded it again, slid it into my back pocket, and went to work. That afternoon, I told Claire I needed to make a stop. We loaded up the Shelby, just like the first time I'd trailered her, except now she gleamed like new, purring beneath her cover, every part a memory. We drove north, past the stretch of highway where the old signs faded into farmland, past the county line where the cell signal got patchy and the air smelled like wood smoke, back to where it all began. Gus's farm hadn't changed much. The barn leaned a little more, a few more shingles missing on the roof, but the porch light still flickered the same way it always did. He was sitting on the steps, wrapped in a coat, sipping coffee out of a chipped mug. When he saw me, he didn't stand, just raised a brow like I was late for something important. "Took you long enough," he said. I smiled. "Had a few things to fix." He stood, bones creaking, and walked with me to the trailer. When I pulled the cover off the Shelby, he whistled low. "Well, damn," he muttered, running his fingers along the roofline. "She came back better than when she left." "She's a fighter," I said. "Like her first owner." He looked at me then, sharp blue eyes glinting under weathered brows. "You remember that glove box note you found?" he asked. I nodded. "That was from my brother. He bought her new. Drove her like a bat out of hell until Vietnam. When he didn't come back, she sat in that barn like time just stopped." He paused, jaw working. "Couldn't bring myself to touch her. But when you showed up that day, all fire and grease, I figured maybe it was time." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. Some moments aren't meant to be filled, just held. He clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You did right by her." I reached into my coat and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a check, 25 grand. More than he'd asked, way more than I owed. He looked at it. then looked at me. "What the hell is this?" "You're cut," I said simply. "Wouldn't be here without you," he grumbled, tried to shove it back in my pocket. I didn't let him. Eventually he took it, not happily, but he took it. We shared a quiet beer on the porch, just like the old days. When we left, he didn't say goodbye, just gave me a nod. That was enough. Story 2. Not for my sister, but for me, I purchased a home. My parents became really alarmed. My family has a favorite, and I've always known it wasn't me. The golden kid was my sister Emily, the one incapable of wrongdoing, the one who was given everything. I was the fallback option in the meanwhile, the spare, the one who was supposed to manage things, take responsibility, and make sacrifices. After years of playing along, I finally decided I was done maturing. The trend was clear. The newest clothing was given to Emily. The fantasy trips, the private tutors. I attended lectures about independence and hard work. She was preparing for a summer vacation to Europe when I was 16 and working as a burger flipper at a seedy roadside eatery. My parents told me I needed to understand priorities when I brought it up. Translation: the future of Emily was important. Mine, not at all. I wasn't resentful, not initially. I simply thought that was the way it was. Parents put money into the child they believe will succeed. What about the other one? Well, he learns to survive on his own. So I did. During college, I worked. While my peers partied, I lived in small flats with housemates who neglected to pay the rent and skipped evenings out, each and every payday. I set something away. For what? I did not know. Simply put, if I fell, no one would be there to catch me. Therefore, I needed a safety net. I was aware that I had two options after graduation: work hard at a low-paying job or take a chance. I thus launched a modest vehicle repair company using the money I had saved. The first year wasn't glamorous, and it was harsh. Weekends spent elbow deep in engine oil, hard hours, and late nights. However, it was worthwhile. I was earning a consistent income by year 5, sufficient to begin contemplating the purchase of my own home. My parents were aware of this, of course. Instead of renting a shoebox flat, I had talked about my desire to eventually purchase a home. And each time I did, they would grin and nod, and the topic of discussion would magically change. You know, Emily has been having a lot of difficulties, as my mother would say dramatically. These days, rent is really high. She just needs a little help, my dad would say. Having a steady place to live would mean a lot to her. The message was plain even if they never stated it directly. Her difficulties were meant to be resolved by me. Ignore the fact that Emily primarily caused her own problems. She was out having the time of her life while I was working 16-hour hours. Designer purses, pricey dining establishments, and vacations. But in some way, she was the one in need of assistance. Afterward, there came the cash. I've been providing my parents with financial support throughout the years, paying for unforeseen expenses, home repairs, and even giving them additional money when times became tough. At first, I didn't mind. After all, they were my parents. However, I soon began to notice small details, such as my dad's unexpectedly expensive new watch or my mom's constant new handbags. I initially believed that they could have just been conserving. Then I understood the purpose of the funds. Emily, my folks weren't having any difficulties. They were just incorporating my assistance into her way of life. Then I heard something that made a huge difference. I had come to drop off something at my folks' place. I had no intention of staying long, but I heard my name as I passed the kitchen. I thus took the logical course of action. I pretended to check my phone while I stopped in place and listened. I have no doubt that he will act morally. According to my mother, he is responsible. He had years of savings. My father concurred. It only makes sense. He can't expect her to strive. He's her brother. Struggle? Emily. The same Emily who had never paid rent a day in her life. The one who still had my parents covering her credit card payments. Something wasn't adding up, and then it hit me. They were talking about my money. I stood there, my pulse beating as awareness struck in. They had a plan, a scheme where I, without ever being asked, would buy a house. Not for me, for Emily. And the worst part, they figured I'd just go along with it like it was clear, like it was my responsibility. I wanted to storm in and demand answers, but I knew how that would go. They'd claim I was being selfish. They talk about family, about duty, about how lucky I was to have made it while Emily battled. I'd heard it all before. I needed to think, so I left without saying a word. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of my tiny studio apartment with a flickering kitchen light. I still hadn't fixed. I thought about every time I had been told to wait my turn, every sacrifice I had made, every time I had swallowed my frustration and smiled. And I thought about Emily, about how she would react if she knew what they were planning. Would she be embarrassed, grateful, or would she just assume it was her right? I got my answer the next morning. Emily called me out of nowhere, her voice dripping with excitement. She went on and on about a new place she had found. "It's perfect," she gushed. 3 bedrooms, a backyard. I can finally move out. I waited for her to say the part that mattered. The part where she told me she had a plan to afford it. But she didn't, because she didn't need one. In her mind, this was already settled. My parents had clearly made sure of that. She even had the audacity to mention that she'd let me crash in the guest room if I ever needed a place to stay. That was it. The moment I knew I wasn't playing along anymore. The very next day, I did exactly what they expected me to do. I bought a house, just not the one they had in mind. I kept it a secret. No grand announcement, no explanations. I found a place I loved, put down my deposit, and signed the papers. It wasn't huge, but it was mine. The first thing in my life that was truly mine. I thought I had time before my family found out. Maybe a few months, maybe even a year. But life has a funny way of speeding things up. I was in the middle of setting up my new kitchen, peeling off those ridiculous live laugh love stickers the previous owner had left behind, when my phone started blowing up missed calls messages. My mom, my dad, Emily, even extended relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. And then I saw the text that made my stomach drop. "Why did we hear from the realtor that you bought a house?" I had no idea how they found out. Maybe the agent mentioned something to someone. Maybe Emily had been looking at the same listings. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I had made my move. And now, the real battle was about to begin. The moment the text popped up on my screen, I knew my peaceful housewarming phase was officially over. My phone wouldn't stop. Buzzing calls, messages, some angry, some concerned, all carrying the same undertone: betrayal. I choose to disregard them. If I picked up now, I get dragged into a conversation with a twist, everything into me being the bad guy. Instead, I went back to setting up my place. The previous owner had left behind some hideous wallpaper in the living room, and if I had to deal with anything stressful today, it was going to be that. Then my doorbell rang. I recognized the person already. I could feel it in my bones when I opened the door. My parents stood there looking less like loving parents and more like corporate executives, ready to discuss my breach of contract. My mom's face was a mix of disappointment and hurt, the kind of look reserved for when I used to forget to call home. My dad said, he had his arms crossed, like he was about to negotiate a hostile takeover before I could even step inside. I braced myself. The next 20 minutes were exactly what I expected. Accusations, guilt-tripping, the whole were family speech. My mom went on about how Emily was heartbroken and didn't know where she lived now. My dad made it clear that they were counting on me to do the right thing. And my personal favorite, the reminder that after everything they did for me, this was how I repaid them. Everything they did for me, like making me pay rent as a teenager, like expecting me to fund my own education while they paid for Emily's designer wardrobe, like letting me work 2 jobs while she got weekend spa getaways. If anything, I had repaid them 10 times over. I could feel my patience wearing thin, but instead of snapping, I stayed quiet, just nodded along. Let them talk. I had learned a long time ago that arguing didn't work. They weren't here to listen. They were here to push their narrative. Then came the ultimatum. My mom, her voice full of artificial composure, told me I had 2 options. Transfer the house to Emily or be cut off. I had to stop myself from laughing. Cut off from what? Their affection and support. The same affection and support that always came with caveats. The same family that had never provided me anything without asking twice as much in return. I told them I'd think about it, not because I genuinely would, but because I wanted them out of my house. They departed looking victorious, like they had just trapped me in to surrender. I took a big breath, walked into my kitchen, and grabbed a drink from the fridge, sat down, peered at my phone, more missed calls. Emily had finally texted, and I could immediately guess what it said. Something about me wrecking her life. Something about how she had counted on me. I opened it, and that's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. A note from Emily. But it wasn't meant for me. She had unintentionally forwarded it to our family group chat instead of whoever she was chatting to. The message? A thorough strategy of how she and my parents were going to break me. How they kept up the pressure till I buckled and handed away the house. There was plain as day indication that none of this was about justice or family. It was an organized takedown, and I was simply an idiot who was meant to roll over. I grabbed a screenshot, saved it, and simply sat there for a minute. For the first time in years, I felt something change. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. They had never viewed me as family. I was merely a resource to be tapped into and needed. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to explain myself. I was just going to show them just how done I was. The next morning, I started making my move. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. If my family wanted a war, they were going to get one. But on my conditions. I wasn't going to fight or explain myself. I was going to take charge of the situation and make sure they understood I was done playing their games. I locked everything down first. I confirmed that only I could make changes to my account over the phone with my bank. I put security cameras around my property as a precaution, changed my passwords, and safeguarded my important papers. Given my family's history, I wouldn't rule out them doing something desperate. I then contacted a lawyer. I didn't know if my parents could really get me into legal trouble, but I wasn't going to take any chances. The lawyer explained my case and assured me that I had nothing to be concerned about as long as everything was in my name, and I had signed all documents for Emily. I was still not taking any chances, but that was good news. I received a text from Emily later that day. Only if I was prepared to put things right would she be open to talking. I chose to ignore it. After a couple of hours, my mother texted me again. She believed we should have a family dinner to talk about everything because she was concerned about me. Yes, exactly. I refused to fall into that trap. Rather, I chose to reverse the situation. I was going to exert some pressure of my own if my family believed they could control me by doing so. I started by using social media. I posted something easy. Nothing noteworthy. Nothing that specifically calls them out. Just a captioned photo of my new home. At last, home. This is all mine, and I worked hard for it. The response came instantly. My extended relatives and friends began praising me and saying how well I deserved it. Then the real fun started. I know Emily saw it, but she didn't say anything. I received another SMS a few hours later. She wasn't as courteous this time. She attacked me, accusing me of being self-centered and humiliating her by making my purchase public. It seems that if I could afford a house, several of her acquaintances had questioned why she wasn't acquiring one. She didn't like that her ego had suffered. The phone call then arrived. It was my dad this time. No more phony worries. We stopped talking about family. He was upset. Said I was making them seem foolish. Said that I was being unappreciative. I let him babble. I then offered him a straightforward response when he eventually asked what I would do to resolve this. Nothing. The thread began at that point. I could forget about ever being invited into their home again if I didn't act appropriately. My comment seems like a win-win to me. About the first time in my life, I didn't feel bad about maintaining my position. I didn't feel like I owed them anything because the fact was, I didn't. I blocked Emily's phone. I to my parents' calls. Then I ordered takeaway from my favorite barbecue establishment, cracked open a cool drink, and sat on my new porch watching the sun set over my hard-won property for the first time in my life. I was completely liberated. The silence didn't last long. By the next morning, my email was swamped with even more messages. Emily had gone into tantrum mode. My parents had started damage control. It seems that after reading my post, certain members of my extended family began to inquire. My parents didn't want anyone outside of their small network to see how seriously messed up things were. My mom was desperately attempting to make the tale appear good, and I could practically hear their talks unfolding. My father complaining that I had somehow betrayed them and that I had a family obligation. Emily, too. She had in fact gone nuclear. She was venting her frustrations on social media, in addition to raving in the family group chat. I read through her most recent entries, which had lengthy, dramatic captions detailing how difficult her life was, how her loved ones had betrayed her, and how she was having trouble finding housing. When I noticed that she had created a GoFundMe, I almost choked on my coffee. Yes, exactly. Help Emily Get the Home She Deserves was the name of the crowdsourcing effort she had really started. It was almost remarkable how bold they were. It was even better described. She portrayed herself as the suffering sister who was turned down for assistance by her heartless brother. Conveniently, she didn't mention that she had been anticipating a free house and had done nothing at all to deserve it. The $20 gift was most likely made by one of her similarly entitled pals. To be honest, I felt a little let down. Make the scam plausible at the very least if you're willing to commit to it. Nevertheless, things were becoming absurd. I had to stop this before it got out of control. I wasn't interested in making this into a family feud on the internet, but I also wasn't going to allow them to defame me. I made the decision to drop one final bomb. This time, I included some receipts in my newly created post, screenshots of Emily's text messages to me, in which she candidly acknowledged conspiring with my parents to coerce me into giving her my house. I only included screenshots and a brief caption to clear up any confusion. I didn't add any commentary. The rest was done by the internet. People began calling her out within hours. Friends who had previously unquestioningly stood by her abruptly stopped talking. When they realized they had been duped, some even turned against her. Emily locked her social media accounts and removed her GoFundMe. Even my parents were struggling to cope with the heat. It seems that some members of the extended family had made the decision to get in touch and inquire as to why they believed it was acceptable to coddle their daughter while demanding a house from their son. The family group chat was completely quiet by the end of the day. No more messages that make you feel guilty. No more calls that are passive-aggressive. Nothing but quiet. And it was magnificent. With my phone happily free of notifications, I relaxed while watching the sunset. A playlist of my favorite songs was playing in the background as I held a cold drink, and I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop for the first time in years. I didn't care if I had done the right thing or what my family thought. It was sufficient that I had done what was right for me. A whole week passed in silence. Nothing, no texts, no calls. For the first time, my parents seemed to realize that I wasn't going to back down, even though I was expecting them to make one last desperate attempt. Perhaps the humiliation in front of the world had finally set in. They might have been reassembling. In any case, I had no intention of settling in. The next surprise then came as I was getting used to my new life. It was the type of large envelope that never brings good news certified mail with my parents' return address on it. At my kitchen table, I took a seat. One hand, coffee. The other is a letter opener. Anticipating whatever foolishness was within, it was a legal notice. My parents were threatening to sue me. I had to read it twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. According to the document, they were claiming I had misled them into believing I was purchasing the home for the benefit of the family and had unjustly enriched myself at their expense. It was absurd. I had never made a single promise to anyone about giving my house away, but their desperation had reached new levels. The best part? They were demanding financial compensation for the emotional distress I caused Emily. Yes, exactly. She was so distraught over not getting a free house that they thought she deserved money. I did what any rational person would do. I laughed. Then I called my lawyer. The talk was brief. My lawyer barely fought back his own enjoyment when he warned me my case had zero chance of holding up in court. At best, it was a scare technique. At worst, a last-ditch effort to persuade me into giving in any way. I wasn't worried, but I also wasn't about to let it slip. If they wanted to escalate things, I'd escalate them right back. I made a couple more calls. One to my bank, just to triple sure everything was locked down, and another to a locksmith to bolster my house security. Then I did the thing I knew would send them over the brink. I wrote my parents a certified letter in reply, advising them that any additional harassment will result in legal action. 2 days later, the phone calls resumed. First my mom, then my dad, then Emily. I disregarded them all. They left voicemails, some remorseful, others still trying to guilt-trip me. My mom's was the finest. She went from tearful to outraged inside a single message, wanting to know how I could turn my back on my own family over something as little as a home. Small. The irony nearly knocked me over. If it was so tiny, why would they willing to go to court over it? Finally, on the third day, I picked up when my dad called. He bypassed the nicety straight to business. They would drop everything if I just agreed to work something out with Emily. I told him there was nothing to work out. The final straw was that. He went on a tirade about how self-centered I was and how I had let them down, how his son would never be like this to his family. I had heard this type of speech a dozen times before, but this time I didn't feel anything. I gave him space to speak. When he eventually ran out of things to say, I informed him gently that I was at a loss for words. I sent him my best wishes. I hung up after telling him I hoped they would move on. That was the end of it. The guilt trip ended, and the legal threats were withdrawn. Lost. At last, my parents appeared to realize that I was refusing to give in. Emily, on the other hand, became quite quiet. She either found another subject to grasp onto or realized she was not receiving anything from me. I felt free for the first time in my life. No more deceit. No more commitments. Only me, my home. As well as a future that truly was mine, I was victorious. It took some getting used to being free for the first several weeks. I had been anticipating the next manipulation for a very long time. However, it was odd to awaken without fearing another family ambush or a passive-aggressive text. Instead of feeling like a place I had to protect, my house suddenly felt like a home. I was able to concentrate on myself for the first time. I established a good regimen, getting up early, going to the gym, preparing authentic meals rather than grabbing quick food on the go. At last, I had the time and energy to appreciate the small things, like sipping coffee on my veranda while seeing the world awaken. I didn't know I needed that type of tranquility. Peace, of course, is not permanent. I was working from home one afternoon when I heard someone knock on the door. Before I saw, my instincts informed me who it was. Emily. It turned out that on the last day of the quarter, she stood on my porch looking more like a door-to-door salesperson than the sister I grew up with. The arrogant assurance had vanished, to be replaced by what appeared to be desperation. Nearly. I refused to allow her in. Rather, I went outside and waited for whatever script she had produced with my arms crossed. She began with clumsy, forced small chat that sounded like she was reciting from a poorly rehearsed script. Then she revealed the true purpose for her visit. After giving it some thinking, she acknowledged that she had been a bit unjust. She had changed her request for a home. Just a place to stay, she promised. Only for a short time. I almost burst out laughing. Correct. Then what? After I gave her permission to move in, I find myself paying her expenses as she sits on my couch, griping about how unfair life is. No way. My reaction was straightforward. Her parents went above and above for her. Why don't you remain with them? The truth came out at that point. There, she was no longer welcome. It seems like our parents' reputations suffered as a result of all that happened. Family members who had previously supported their actions weren't so willing to support them. Some of Emily's pals had even turned away. It turns out that people don't particularly want to be associated with you after you go viral for attempting to con your own brother. Emily had more in mind than simply finding a place to rest. She wanted to get away from the disaster she had created. I refused to fall for the ruse. I informed her that I no longer wanted to play that part. No animosity. However, I wasn't in charge of resolving issues she caused. Her countenance shifted as soon as I said those words. The phony humility fell. The same old anger took its place. She referred to me as self-centered. Those families ought to support one another. I simply shrugged. All I could feel was relief as she stormed off, making a dramatic departure that might have worked when we were kids. A few days later, while standing in line at a coffee shop, I made a quick trip to the mall to pick up a few items. I recognized the voice. Emily was at a nearby table, talking loudly to someone. I didn't mean to listen in, but it's difficult to avoid it when your sister's voice is so loud. She was loudly complaining about how difficult life was right now, and how she needed to get a real job like everyone else. It was exhausting, she continued, and she couldn't believe people did this every day. The woman she was speaking to, meanwhile, appeared to be just a few seconds away from reminding Emily that the majority of people have been doing just that for ages. To stop myself from laughing, I bit my lip. It was too good. I picked up my coffee and passed her table without saying anything. Even though she didn't see me, I couldn't help but smile as I went outside. In my life, for the first time, Emily's drama wasn't mine to handle. You know what happened when someone else heard a monologue about the injustices in life? I was okay with that. Later that evening, I got a text from my mom, a last-ditch effort to guilt me into reconsidering something about how family sticks together and how she couldn't believe how cold I had become. I chose to ignore it. They had spent years making it clear that I wasn't really part of their definition of family, unless I was useful to them. Now I finally understood something important. I wasn't cold. I was just done. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to explain myself to anyone.